standards within their state, and then see if they're making progress on all the different tests that you can look at. In Virginia, after we passed our standards of learning under Governor George Allen, and I voted for those, our test scores started going up. Under those circumstances, I don't think that the federal government should have come in and dictated to the state to create a whole new plan when we are already showing success. But I do think that the federal government can ask the states to try to beef up their education, to see if the standardized tests and other measures to see if the educational process is working, and if that's the case, then I think that we should leave the states to make these decisions for themselves. I do think that we need to make sure that we have the best education system in the world. Oftentimes our system is compared with other countries, and what they don't look at is they don't look at sometimes that we are doing more universal education than really any other country in the world when it comes to our students. And so a lot of times they'll come back and say, oh look, you're not doing so well. What they don't realize is that basically our 85% of our students are competing with 20 or 25% of their students. So I think we have a fairly good educational system. It can always be improved. And I think that this is something that really belongs to the states, but the national government should be looking at it because it does affect the country as a whole.
All right, the next question is for Mr. Bell. This question is one that's already been asked and answered. Where do you stand on term limits? So since Mr. Boucher is not here to give his opinion, then we will not ask that. So this one is for Mr. Boucher. And this one has also been asked, how do you stand on the fair taxes? Apparently Mr. Boucher didn't want to answer these questions because he's not here to answer them. I think they're perfectly valid questions, and as Congressman he should have feel the responsibility of answering. Can we see no more questions for Mr. Boucher? Are there any more questions for Mr. Heaton?
No.
Are there any more questions for Mr. Griffith?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, this has already been asked. This is on the fair tax. Asked and answered.
This one term limits.
All right, this question, when are electric prices coming down? You know, one thing that I have to comment on is I understand Mr. Boucher didn't want to come because he didn't want to have to face the questions that you all might ask, but you've asked some really hard questions for Mr. Griffith to answer, and he's here answering them. You go ahead and answer the question, Mr. Griffith.
Well, I don't know at this point when electric rates will come down, but I will tell you that what we need to do is we need to make sure they don't skyrocket. And cap and trade will make your electric rates skyrocket. A big part of the reason that our bills have gone up, not the exclusive reason, but a big part of the reason that our bills have gone up is because of federal regulation on electricity. What the State Corporation Commission does on behalf of the people of Virginia and as appointed by the legislature is they look at what the expenses are, and they determine, because it's a monopoly utility, they determine what the appropriate cost should be and what the costs are for that electric company, and then they pass that through to the consumer. So when the federal government, whether it be cap and trade, which is coming if we don't make a change in Congress, or whether it be the regulations already passed, the electric company passes those costs on to us and to all the businesses in the state. And so what happens is that as those costs go up, so do our rates. When the government puts regulations on that makes it more expensive, it becomes an expense for us. And so when you have coal being more expensive, the rate goes up. Sometimes that's caused by the government, sometimes it's caused by the world market, but we ought to be making sure that coal, natural gas, and other energy forms are as cheap as they can be. And we are rich, particularly here in coal, and we ought to be using that asset to have cheap or cheaper electricity, because if we have that, we can attract more manufacturing jobs to this region. And jobs is the #1 concern of this country, but particularly of this congressional district where we have had unemployment higher than the rest of the state for many years. And I think my time is just about up on that, but I may get into that later.
All right, all of the other questions for Mr. Griffith have already been asked and answered. So what I'm going to do at this point... Have they been asked? Yeah. All right, I'm told I was wrong once again. This one is, I expect you to help Southwest Virginia even though you do not live in my district. Can you promise me you will look to my district always?
Yes, and as many of you know, based on the census data, based on what Legislative Services, which is a nonpartisan staffing for the legislature, Senate's controlled by the Democrats, House controlled by the Republicans, and the staff serves both houses. 67,000 people have to be moved into the district next year. So while I right now will always say, I can tell you, I will always look out for Southwest Virginia, and while right now I live a foot outside the district, five and a half months after being sworn in as your congressman, I'll be right smack dab in the middle of the district, because when you take 67,000 people and they can only come from the north, I'm going to be in the district.
Does that have anything to do with your personal wishes or anything?
In reality, I mean, obviously, I have personal wishes,
yeah.
but in reality, the 67,000 people, I think the natural way, following the rules that the Supreme Court has set out, it does not have anything to do with my personal wishes. I'm already surrounded on 3 sides by the 9th District in my little neighborhood, 14 houses. Unless somebody's playing games and not following what the Supreme Court has dictated you're supposed to do for redistricting, my house will be in the district by mid-June of next year.
Right. Now, we don't have any reply by the others because they're obviously not here. This question, I tell you, we are being completely fair. I'm asking every question that's being asked. And this one, it says, we have found you to be very non-responsive to citizens while in the general, assembly. How can we trust you to be any better as our congressman?
Well, and I don't know, and I have to talk to the individual who says that I've been non-responsive, and that's kind of hard in a blind question, but I will tell you that I have consistently been reelected in my district. The lowest margin I ever got was 59.8. That we try to be very responsive, that we try to set up appointments with folks if they want to come to the office, that if somebody wants me to go out and see a scene, I try to go to that. Obviously, there are going to be times, if unresponsive means I didn't vote the way that you wanted me to, there are going to be times when I am not going to agree with every constituent. And in the Virginia legislature, we have to make tough choices. And sometimes those choices aren't popular. But I will tell you that I'm always available to talk to folks. I do ask that you not just, drop by. You might get me, you might not, but don't just drop by and then say I'm not responsive. But we do the best that we can, and we work very hard at it. As you know, as a part-time legislator, I also practice law, and so there are a lot of times when I'm out doing that. And of course, for the last few months, I've been practicing law, being a delegate in the House of Delegates, and campaigning for Congress.
All right, one final question, and I'm not even going to ask, I assume that neither Mr. Boucher nor Mr. Heaton have come, so the next question I'm going to ask is the last that we will ask from here. If John Boehner asked you to vote for foreign aid appropriations, how will you vote?
Well, I would have to make that decision for myself. I try to make all of those decisions for myself, and it wouldn't necessarily matter whether John Boehner asked me or somebody else asked me. I would want to take a look at the appropriateness of it, whether it was the right thing to do for the United States of America, whether it met the criteria that we may want to have, and whether or not, because we now have budget issues, whether or not we had the money that we could justify spending in that way. I don't think it has anything to do with John Boehner. I can say, since I've been asked a question about John Boehner, that and he is the person expected to be the speaker should the Republicans take control, is that I will never vote for a speaker who doesn't protect our gun rights. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent.